On this episode of the podcast, I have Shoshana French on the show with me. We talk about practical intuition, how to make decisions using your intuition. The difference between, this is interesting, the difference between how we receive our intuitive guidance and then how we process that information. Some very interesting stuff in there. And then 3 myths about intuition that we bust through. So intuition is the way that we are both deeply guided through life. And it's such a powerful conversation about the beauty of the way synchronicities can unfold in the best possible way when you choose to listen to your intuition. So please enjoy the show. Hello, and welcome to the Wealth Alchemist podcast. My name is Carrie Norley. I am the host of the show. And today I have this beautiful, beautiful goddess of a woman, Shoshana French, with me on the call. And her goal is to cultivate wildly successful leaders through the practical power of intuition. As the founder of Simple Spirit, a keynote speaker and coach to NFL leaders, Broadway and television stars, million and billion-dollar business founders, CEOs, and business professionals, Shoshana French generates unpredictable and profound results for leaders who are looking to develop a deeper connection to their purpose. I love that. Shoshana and I have actually met. If you guys have been listening, you'll know there is a call on here with Megan Conter from the Dames. Shoshana and I actually met in the Dames. She is this beautiful, light, gorgeous being. I love having conversations with her. And I'm super excited to drop into the conversation around intuition today. So welcome to the show, Shoshana.
Thank you. I'm super excited to have this. This is obviously my absolute favorite thing to talk about in general. And when you and I met, we talked about it and just off the cuff had a good time. So this is fun that we're going to be capturing this conversation we're having and other people can kind of listen because we know it's going to be really fun.
You know what's so fun about this show I found is like, I love the fact that I just meet really cool people in my walk of life. And I love having these conversations. And like, these are my pretty normal conversations. Anyone who's listening to my podcast, I'll just say they're pretty normal conversations for me to have. And I love that I just get to bring them to the world, because when we start to like raise our vibration and shift into a new way of thinking and being in the world, it is a new conversation to be had. And I love that we get to bring these conversations to people who might not already understand it. And intuition is something for me specifically where I can definitely say for years, and I'm sure you could agree, that I have lived, about your life as well, that I have lived my life guided by my intuition for as long as I can remember. And most people will look at me like, you are an absolute nutcase for some of the stuff that I do. And intuition can be it can be tricky. It can be tricky, right? Like in the fact that like it can ask us to do things that we don't want to do, that are not totally easy, true. That they're like, oh my God, that scares me, but we do them anyway. Right. Yeah. And I think this is the beautiful thing about intuition, is that when you learn to use it and you learn to trust it, that even when those scary, hairy moments come in our lives, that it's like, you're going to go and pack up your house and you're going to move overseas and you didn't even know you were going to do that, Carrie. You're like, okay, I guess I am. Or you're going to go to okay, I guess I am. But if you learn to trust it and you learn to do this enough, then when those moments come, you go, I trust. And the thing that I would love to drop into it, because one of the things that Shoshana talks about is intuitive decision-making and practical intuition. And I love that because a lot of people think intuition is a woo-woo thing that like, it's for some people, not for everybody, or it's for some decisions, but it's not for everything. And so I love that you talk about this in a practical way. So I'd love for you to open up, like, which part of this, where would you like to go? How it's practical, how you go into decision-making with it. You can go. Where do you want to start, my love?
Well, so I want to define so that the people listening get what I mean when I'm talking about intuition.
Perfect.
Because people talk about it in such diverse ways. This is my definition. So
awesome.
Intuition is a direct way of knowing, understanding, or a sense about something that doesn't require processing data first. That's intuition. So for me, what I distinguish is the difference between data-driven decision-making and intuitive decision-making. And what I mean by that is data-driven decision-making is oriented towards, seeing a problem that you can see because you're looking at data, whether data is numbers on a paper, numbers in an account, or data like a data point, like, oh, there is clearly miscommunication in my team at work that's a problem, right? And now we need to fix it. And we're going to find a solution for that. That's data-driven decision making. Intuitive decision making is not about fixing something. It is about being aware of and curious and creating something new. And so that's sometimes I think why people relate to intuition as something, you said woo woo, and I say that. What I also say is some people just think that intuition seems really mysterious and magical and tricky. And in my experience, it's not any of those things. Once you know how it works, you can apply it to decision making. So that for me, just in the world of definition and to lead our conversation,
Perfect.
that I think is important. Like
So
I'm
important.
all about, I'm not about getting rid of data. Data is useful, helpful. It has its place. And so when I teach people or train people to trust their intuition and become intuitive decision makers, it doesn't mean it replaces the data-driven decision making they make. Like you should keep doing that. But we are trained to be only data-driven decision makers. So
Totally.
it doesn't leave a lot of room.
It's the person who's like, I'm going to go and move and I've got the spreadsheet and this is the stuff that I like and this is the stuff that I don't like. And if it doesn't meet each of these boxes on each of these things, then it can't possibly be. And yet somehow you walk into a house and you put that sheet to the side and you walk into a house and you're like, oh my God, this feels amazing. And then from there you can go, does it tick the boxes? If you even have to go that far, right? And I think so much like, it's interesting because I talk about this with investing too. When people often will come into the world of investing and like so many people will go through their intuition, right? Like, yes, we can do things intuitively. Yes, this feels like the right place to go. Then do your due diligence, right? Like before you go and put your money somewhere, you can still go and go, okay, well, is this legit? Does this have like the right backing behind it? Or is this some complete and utter scam? Like, sure, follow your intuition. And then you can also still do, right? It's not an either or. And sometimes, right? Or even like, for example, I said, my intuition said, this was 5.5 years ago. My intuition told me it would have been 6 years ago now. My intuition said to me, it was time to go for a trip overseas when I was living in Sydney. And it was like, you really need to, like, it was guiding me like on this long-term trip overseas for a few months to go and do these things. And I was like, no way, shut up. That's too hard. That's too scary. What are you talking about? I don't know if I have the money, blah, 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 all that noise, right? This is what can happen when we first have those intuitive thoughts, right? And the ego comes in. And then I was like, okay, Carrie, let's get practical about this, right? Intuition, because I couldn't let it go. And it's usually when it keeps coming, right? It keeps saying, keeps knocking, keeps talking. And I'm like, okay, so let's sit down and listen to this. And at that point, then I looked, do I have the money? How would I make this happen? What's it going to cost? And let's get practical. Oh, wait, I can do this. All right, intuition, let's go then. Right. Versus like, oh, yes, here's intuition. Let's go buy the ticket. Let's drop everything and go move. Like, we can still have practical aspects to all of this as well.
Well, and it's sort of the difference between now your intuition has communicated something and we have free will. So you don't have to follow your intuition. Just like someone could show you data and you could ignore the data and choose something else. I mean, that happens all the time. I know lots of clients that I've had who, against the advice of their advisors in their businesses, decide to launch something anyway because the data says don't do it, and they do it and it works out fine. So I'm a big proponent of, and I mean, I have been training and like developing my own intuition for 27 years. So this is, while maybe prior to that, I was using my intuition, it wasn't until 27 years ago that I had the words to describe this thing that had been happening my whole life. And then I went on this journey to discover, like, well, then how do you apply it? Because mostly the world I came from when I learned intuition was pretty metaphysical. So it was like intuition for spiritual development, intuition for connecting to other dimensions and connecting to beings that you can't see. And I love all that stuff because I'm pretty woo, but I'm also incredibly practical. So when I went to try to bridge those two things, there was literally no one in the world who was bridging those things, like no one. So you either made decisions by data and you got better at it, or you did intuitive stuff, but it was really this woo-woo, magical, mystical thing. So my whole like the most important thing to me is conversations with people to have them recognize intuition is something that's there. I'm not teaching you your intuition. Your intuition is already there. You actually are born intuitive. All of us are. You watch kids, they're the most intuitive of all of us. However, to make it in the world, I almost want to say to make it in the world today takes everything. It was like that song. Isn't that's a Cheers. Oh my God, totally just popped in my head. Anyway, so in order though to make it in the world, there are certain things you have to do, ways that you have to conform, ways you have to be, ways you have to talk, ways you have to dress. And all of us go through that experience where we start to suppress who we are to fit in. And when we do that, that suppresses our intuition because we're like dressing a particular way and going to a certain party, even though we don't want to go, doesn't feel right to go, but we go anyway. We let our bosses talk to a certain, I mean, like there's a number of things that happen and all of that curbs our natural intuition. So mostly what I'm doing when I'm training people is we take all the mystery and the magic and the woo-woo out of intuition. And we talk about what is intuition? Like, oh, intuition is a natural way that things work. It's a friend of mine, we're talking about it. It's like, we have no question that when you put your hand on something hot and you'll start to feel it burn, you pull your hand away because you're like, oh, that's how the body works. Do I understand exactly what's happening? I mean, I love brain biology, so I understand a little bit of what's happening, but if you don't understand what's happening, you still move your hand away from the thing. You're like, right. Oh, ow, right? So to me, intuition is the same. It's the way that our body and our brain's designed. And once you understand how it works, so some people get a poke in the brain like you did, like go on this trip, go on this trip. Some of us get a feeling about things. Some of us know stuff. Some of us see things. We're all designed a little bit differently. But once you understand the mechanics, then it's just a matter of actually practicing applying it regularly to see what happens. And, you can apply it literally to every area of life. I've had clients apply it to investments like stocks. I've had clients apply it to whether to marry someone or not. I've seen people use it to determine where to go on vacation. I had a client use it for what color she painted her office because she wanted her office to feel inviting. So she was like, I don't know what color. And anybody who's ever looked at paint colors, there's like 1,000. You're like, I don't know. And she was like, it's too hard. I was like, well, use your intuition. So she held every paint chip and finally one felt right. And that's the one she chose. And she, like, every time I'm on the phone with her, she's so happy. So you can literally use it for anything.
Amazing. Absolutely. I 100% agree. You can use it even in what we're going to eat for dinner. And, and I think this is, I mean, like for me, one of the things I have definitely worked with in my intuition is my food choices. For sure, right? Because so often, like you said, like we're trained out of like listening to our bodies and what we want for food. And then we're told that we have to go onto some certain diet and eat certain food. And in order to be this certain size, you have to do it this way. And you have to eat this many macros. And it has to be at this morning and that evening and this hour. And if you don't eat this much and you eat this much exercise, you're fucked. And like, I got to a point a couple of years ago, I was so freaking sick of diet rules that all of the rules, I'm still breaking out of this. Like, it's still something I'm personally working on, but like having studied nutrition for so long and having studied so many different things and having a husband that's in this field and all that kind of stuff, it's like, there's a quote unquote diet for everything. And then one will tell you that sugar's bad for you. One will tell you that fat's bad for you. One will tell you that this is bad for you. One will tell you that vegetables are bad for you. One's going to tell you that meat's bad for you. Everything in the world is either bad for you or good for you, depending on which diet you look at, right? And so if we come back to intuition, like one of the things that I've really worked on is like, how can I let my body guide the decision? And then all of a sudden, chocolate isn't a bad thing if you eat in moderation. It's like sometimes your body actually, it's like, yes, okay, I'll have a bite of my chocolate. Do I need to eat an entire block of chocolate? My body actually will say no, right? My body actually tends to say no to the entire block of chocolate. But, but maybe it's fruit. And if I listen to the diet that says no sugar, then I wouldn't go and eat that fruit or have that smoothie or whatever. And so I think it's such a beautiful thing when we really start to trust. And so I'm curious to hear, because to me, practical, I guess some of the practical pieces of intuition to me are being in my body and like feeling that. right? Like feeling like, what does my body want? What is it speaking to me? What is it saying to me? But I'm curious to hear, like, how do you make this practical for people in their decision making?
I call it PAL, PAL, pause, ask, listen. So the pause is going from turning down the volume of all the external noise, all the stuff you're talking about, those rules. And, there's a proliferation of, I said that word wrong, proliferation. There's
That's right.
proliferation of,
Proliferation.
we live in a time where we are inundated with information 24/7, like literally 24/7. I got lost in TikTok for like 45 minutes the other day. And I was like, oh my God, someone pull me out. Cause you can just there's so much content and information and right. So if you were like a leaf in water and all the information was the current, you would go 150 different directions in 3.5 seconds. Like there's just so much information. So to me, the pause is pause the focus on things outside of you. So, unplug from data, unplug from people, all that kind of stuff. Identify all of the rules and opinions that are like swirling around in your brain. And then recognize some of your own internal noise, because we have a lot of noise too, right? So if you have a rule that you learned when you were a kid, which is weighing high on the BMI scale means you're fat and lazy, although you run and eat healthy, I'm using air quotes so people can't see that, the eating healthy, but yet the data says that you're unhealthy as far as then your internal conversation sucks. So all of those things keep you from being inside of you and present. So that's pause. The pause is what do you do to get present? And everybody's built a little bit differently. So some people, we were talking about, rewiring a brain, people do that. I have a client who's right now working with some trauma stuff. And so she's doing some EMDR and some talk therapy. That's really helping her identify her internal conversations. But if just on a daily practical basis, physical movement is awesome for getting in the body and for quieting. And I say all of this is practical because if you want to hear your intuition, it's not occurring outside of you. It's not coming from outside of you. It happens inside of you. For some people, it is literally in the body like a feeling. So if you are filled with your reactions to everybody's opinion around you, it's really hard to hear it. It's just hard to hear it. You can't tell if the feeling you're having is nervousness because of the argument you just had with somebody, or that nervousness now is the feeling about the next meeting you have. Like you feel actually hesitancy about the next meeting, which could be an intuitive communication. So that's the pause. Ask. The thing that people don't do, and this is for me practical, your intuition is not separate from you. So you have to ask questions because it's a tool. So there's an engaged conversation. There's lots of questions we can ask our intuition, and there are tools to make it easier to listen following questions, but engaged questions. So I like to ask questions like, well, why does it feel that way? Why do I have a feeling of just discomfort about that person? What is that feeling in the body? Why do I keep having this recurring thought about this person? Why does this person keep popping in my head? Why is my eye drawn to that necklace that person's wearing? What's that about? Like, why am I so drawn?
Too, right? Like the
Yeah.
sense of like, oh, there's a sense of like awkwardness or
yeah. Why when I'm talking to this person on the phone, am I hearing things they're not saying? Like, what is that there's like, I just keep hearing that there's more to their story, right? Like, what is that? So for me, the ask is you have to get curious. That's the practical requirement for intuition. When you are allowing yourself to get curious, it switches on what I would call that place in your brain where imagination happens versus the place where your brain holds data, where it's processing what you already know. When you're in the space of imagination, it allows you to think bigger than what you already know. That's where intuition has some chance to come in. And then the last is listen. And listening is I don't think any of it's hard, but listen takes practice. So the way I describe it is a little bit like when you have anybody who has little kids whether you have little kids or you've been in a restaurant where there are little kids, it is overwhelming to them because they're supposed to be paying attention to the meal they're having in their family, but there's all these other people. And so they keep turning around in the booth and popping like their head up to see what's going on. And they're like, Mom, do you hear that across the way? And mom knows you shouldn't be listening to the conversation to the table over there. That's not, stop, sit down, Samantha, sit down. You should not be listening, right? But like, that's how our brain is. Our brains are just like that, but we look a little more sophisticated than that. We pretend that we're paying attention when really our mind is following everything that's around us. So if you can practice focusing on one thing at a time, which is not easy, by the way, but if you can practice that, it's easier to hear the one communication that is coming. So the way that you do that is, one, by pausing, two, by asking a very specific question. So your brain is only focused on one thing. And then because now you're already curious, you ask the question that you really want to know what it's going to say, what your intuition is going to say, then it makes it easier to listen. So that's one way I make it practical, is wherever people are, that's the first thing they can start doing. And the other way I make it practical is I created an intuitive, it's called the intuitive blueprint. So it's a test that people can take to give them a blueprint of how their intuition works. And it's like an intuitive personality test.
And they can I think they can go to your website, right?
Yeah. If people go to howtobeintuitive.com, you can take the test there, howtobeintuitive.com. And this is not a quiz like people have sometimes where it's like to sell you something. This is actually like, it's 36 questions. It takes about 5 minutes. And, it's going to ask you questions that you're going to have to like think about a little bit, because this is about how your intuition works. It will give you a set of 7 numbers. And inside of those numbers, it will explain how your intuition works.
Love it.
I've been able to identify the way that people's intuition works, and no one's intuition works the same. No. Everybody's works. Even if I had 2 people who had the exact same numbers, our likes and dislikes are different. So that's when it gets really interesting. You're like, oh, got it. The husband is someone who's oriented mentally. They're mind oriented, but the wife is more body oriented. And so, oh my gosh, no wonder they're having this communication, because his intuition is coming from a place of wanting to understand something. And so it's very mentally, that's how his intuition comes in, is very mentally is how he understands things. Whereas hers is a body thing. She's like, I don't know all that stuff you're saying. It just doesn't feel right to me. Like there's something here. It just doesn't.
And then the guy wants you to be able to explain it with words. I'm like, I don't have words, but I know 100% I'm not supposed to go there. There is no logical reason, but I listen to my intuition, and my intuition says, fuck no.
Well, and it can, and it happens the other way too. That
right. Both ways. Yeah.
Totally. Just even. Yeah. So I liked your question, which is like, how do you make it practical? Well, the first thing is you just talk about it in a way that's practical. I ask people, if you absolutely trusted every decision you make, what would you do? Like, how would you operate in the world? That is what being an intuitive decision maker allows. It allows you to trust every single decision you make. And that's a little like, people are like, well, I don't know what you mean by that. Like without checking with other people first. Yeah. Without like checking the numbers. Yes. Like you actually could trust every decision you're going to make, because who knows better than you?
No, and it's interesting. I have so many things that I'm like, okay, so I'm going to start with some of the things that you said with the pause. One of the things that was really interesting in that was like one of the, I'd say the nuances in what you said that I'd love to add. I think especially for empaths, right? We do, like you said this, like we have to just differentiate what's mine and what's yours. And so sometimes a question that I ask myself when I'm feeling like, especially if I've been in a room with a lot of people, like this week, you guys, right? Like I was just away for 10 days with tons of people in these conferences for the Bitcoin conference, the Miami crypto experience. And when as an empath, we get into these spaces, I mean, I can put up all my barriers and my bubbles and all this stuff. Like I'm still going to take people's stuff in, right? And so every day I'd come home and I'd decompress and whatever. But it's been like, I finally got home, and yesterday I was like, and I got into the caves and I was like, okay, everybody can now leave officially. Like we can fully have all of this leave my body. Right. And in those times, we have to make sure that we are asking, like, I asked myself if I'm like, I think I probably would have struggled to make a really big decision in those few days, right? Because there was so much of new people's information at me. I probably would not have chosen to. Think I did not have to make a big decision. I just had to be there and be present to whatever I had to do there. But it probably wouldn't have been a good time for me, right? And now that I'm home and back in my normal environment, generally speaking, it's like even if I go into a room with other people, I will decompress afterwards. And then if I start to have these like questions that come in, I'm like, is this mine or is this theirs? Right? Is this my energy? And sometimes it is like we've caught on to other people's, we didn't realize it. There's other stuff that's there. And so I think that's one thing that was really important that you said, like we can oftentimes, is it somebody that we've been around? Is it conditioning that we've had from past experiences? Is it from generations ago that we've been conditioned to believe this thing and this is what's filtering this? Or is this me actually listening to my intuition?
Yeah.
The other thing I thought I would say when you talked about all of this stuff, I loved your things. Pause, ask, listen. The next piece I would add, just as my personal, would be act, right? Like we can listen to these things. And then the next step always is to like, what's the divine next aligned action to take from listening to my intuition? And to add to that last piece that you said on that note, excuse me, is that with listening to our divine guidance, I love that you said this, like what would happen if we listened to every single thing and acted on every single intuitive guidance that we got? What I find for people, and you can tell me if you find this as well, but what I find for people who are new to listening to their intuition, that sometimes like it is because of conditioning that was passed. It isn't quite like the most, I'd say, like there might be some other little thing in there, or there might be like, this was like a little bit off path and you're like, oh, I got it just a little bit like tweaked. Right. And you still did it and you still went exactly where you needed to go. And I think that's one of the things that we forget sometimes is that even if it's just a little bit skewed and we just like didn't quite get exactly like this, like, because it's a refinement, I think, as we listen to our intuition. It gets more clear as we go and it gets more clear as we trust it. And if you're new to it, listen anyway. And even if it takes you a little bit, like you're like, that wasn't quite 100% right. Like it was 100% right. And that's what I want to say. Like it was 100% right because you learned that lesson too. And then you learned like, really? That first thing that dropped in, because this is usually what happens. That first thing that dropped in that I didn't really want to hear and listen to, right? That I skewed just a little bit because it was actually easier for my ego. It was like, then I went that way. No, really, it was that first thing. And then the more that we trust it and the more that we trust it, the clearer it gets. But no matter where you are, it's perfect. And you are absolutely where you're meant to be, even if it's like slightly off in those first times that you try this out. Does that make sense? Do you find that as well?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that the only way to build trust is to practice following what it says. Like there was this article that I read about, they had people who visualized playing the piano, people who practiced the piano, and then people who did both. And obviously the people who most improved were the people who both visualized and played. And like practiced. So in my world, some of the work that you're doing when you really begin the practical application of intuition is the inner work that is required to align yourself. And that's a word I use. And I don't use it like in a woo-woo way. I just mean being aligned with yourself, being able to know what your wants and desires are, because that affects what you're asking about, obviously. Like if what you want most in life is to make your husband happy, then your intuition is going to respond accordance to that. Like, because that's what you're asking about. If what's really important for you in life is a lot of freedom and the ability to follow your own path, when you check in with your intuition, it will align with that. So it's going to align. That's why that inner work is so important, because otherwise, then how do you know what you want? So totally. I've watched lots of people.
That's a really important point.
It
really
is.
important point.
Yeah, people get nervous to try it because they're like, what if what I'm hearing is not accurate? Just like what you said. What if it's off? Like, what if I'm misunderstanding it? And what I say is, like anything else, like do your best and just try it, because and try it on. I always recommend that people try it on things that they're not really
It doesn't matter.
emotionally like,
Like,
hyped about.
should I eat this? Should I eat the orange or the apple? Does it really
Yeah.
matter in the end of the day? No.
Yeah. Like go to the grocery store. And I mean, there's lots of games you can play. There's one of the people that I learned intuition from, her book, Sonia Choquette. She's definitely in the woo-woo spiritual focused realm around intuition, but she had this game around, she was like, play the I wonder game. And that one I have clients do that. So I have clients do it on a corporate level. I'm like, you're sitting in your office and play the I wonder game. I wonder who's going to come into my office first today.
Before we hop into the show, I want to let you know that you can grab your copy of my book, The New Wealth: Magnetize Abundance, Hold Your Wealth, and Leave a Legacy. It's available on Kindle, and you can get physical copies on Amazon as well. If you want to grab yourself a signed copy, head on over to carrienorley.com/New Wealth Book. This book is here on this planet at this time to help you move into a new era of money, wealth, and finances. It is way more than just information. It's an activation into infinite bliss, love, joy, abundance, and peace. If you implement what I talk about in this book, your life is sure to change and become more abundant. Someone recently left a review on Amazon saying the day that he read the book, he made $10,000. Celebrating that. Woo-woo! I have actually had multiple people tell me that their finances have increased as a direct result of reading this book. So just do yourself a favor and go grab your copy of the book and actually read it so that you can discover how to magnetize abundance, hold on to the money that you receive, and grow your wealth and leave a legacy, financially or otherwise. Then please let me know what happens for you as a result. I always love hearing the wins from my readers and listeners. Go grab your copy today and remember to share on social media so that we can get the word out to even more people. And now, on to the show.
And then if you are someone who sees things, does someone's face pop in your head? If you're someone who knows things, does the knowing of who's going to come in your office happen? If you're a feeler, do you notice like a feeling and then like a something right after it that's an indication of someone that you could think of? Do you hear their name? Like, depending how you translate, and then play that game. Stand in front of a bank of elevators and play the I wonder which one's going to open when you press the button. I play that sometimes. Like then that way it gets you to a place where it feels a little less intense and more like a game.
Curiosity game.
Yeah. I mean, it's not any different. Like nobody is gonna, learn football by going to the Super Bowl. Like you're not gonna that's not gonna be the first place that you play. You go practice first. So go practice. And the thing I say, and I love what you said, which is you're always refining it. I've been doing it professionally for almost 17 years, using my own intuition for clients and training people for the last 10, how to practically apply intuition. And I'm still refining it because we're human. It's not like all of a sudden we reach enlightenment or something. I mean, maybe I don't know about that. I can't really speak on things that I don't have a lot of knowledge of, but as far as I can tell with the people I've known in 45 years of life, it's not like all of a sudden people suddenly reach enlightenment and like they're perfect. We're human. So our intuition, moves with us because it is us. So, when we're moving through junk, whether it's like our relationship to our ability to be successful or maybe wounding we have from our parents and our childhood, that stuff affects our intuition. So you gotta, just practice. That's my point. Keep practicing. And even if you're like, I don't know if I really heard it right or not, like just practice and see what happens. Because the only way to recognize the communication is from doing that. That's it.
One of my favorite ways to practice, and that I always kick myself about, I'm going to tell you, is driving.
Oh
you
God,
get in the car and you're like, like you get in the car and you're like, I think, or those places that you know where you're going, but you're like, it's been a while since I've been here. I'm gonna try it without the map. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna go left. And the intuition, I swear to God, I hate when I don't listen to it. It goes, go left. And I'm like, but I swear it's right. And you go right and you're like, dang it, intuition, you were darn right. Right. And it's a great place because really, unless you're in some really bad part of the city, so what? You make a wrong turn, you turn around, and 2 minutes later, you're back on path and you're totally fine. But it's such a fun game to play. It's to like, okay, can I remember? And can I let my intuition guide me? And can I truly listen to it? Because it's every time I don't listen to it, I go, Seriously, you should know by now, Carrie. And I just laugh at myself.
I love that game. I like to play the like, who's behind me driving? And like, I wonder what they look like, or I wonder who they are. I wonder what color the car is behind me. And then I look in my rearview mirror. An example of the pause, ask, listen, by the way, in this instance is we all the time get in our car and drive somewhere and have no sense of presence about like, we're just all of a sudden there and we don't remember driving because our mind was somewhere else, but which is deeply frightening, but explains a lot how many accidents there are. But driving is a great opportunity to pause because you can like, before you actually turn on this massive vehicle and move through space and time, like take a moment, like you're 16, check all your mirrors, right? Like turn the music on that you want, turn your phone on, do not disturb, like have your hands to make sure that you like where you have your seat, like do the whole thing to be paused and present and then drive. And then it's really fun to play the game you said, which is, where am I going? Like which way to go? I agree with you. That's so fun.
Sometimes I've been getting more adventurous lately and been like, I have a girlfriend and I who are both very intuitive healer type, people. And we just like, we play games now. We're like, where should we just get in the car and start driving and figure out where we're going to go and see where we're going to end up for dinner? Okay, let's just try. Where should we go today? And we get in and we're like, where's the world going to take us? Like, and it's like such an exciting adventure knowing that like, I trust that the world's going to take me to just the right place at just the right time. And I'm going to make it just fine. It's just there's so many ways to play with it. Okay, so this is something that was interesting that you said too. Receive info one way and you process it another. Now, I love we started talking about it, receiving information, and you've glimpsed over it. I will say something along the lines to make this like a very concrete thing. What I'm hearing you talk about is your clair senses, right? So like your auditory, your visual, your knowing, your being, your physical, your mental, right? So these different senses that we have. So what I'm hearing is that we're all processing our intuition in different ways through these different senses. And it's true. Like I personally, a lot of people who are in this work are very gifted in their vision and they'll see things. I personally have that. It's probably one of my weakest, like I see black. And people are like, but how do you see? I'm like, I sense it. So when someone tells me to visualize, I'm like, okay, I'm like, I've started to tell people, I'm like, I don't actually see anything. It's black, but I sense that if there was something in front of me, it would look like this. Right. And so I think that's a really important piece that you're saying, because when we start to receive information, it can be in a different experience. And a lot of people just assume, Carrie, don't you see it? I'm like, no, I really like, it's just black. I can't understand people who are visual. Like, I can't understand. I'm like, really, it's just black.
You know that some people don't have that, like the thing where you visualize in your mind's eye. Some people's brains don't work that way. I didn't know that. Black. Yeah, some people's brains don't. I had to learn that in teaching people because to me, that's something also distinct. So the reason why I even talk about the difference between how your intuition works and then how we process things is because what I start to notice is that that's the thing that comes up for people when they're trying to determine what is intuition versus what is ego or past-based training or something. It helps them distinguish the difference. So intuitively, I am oriented mentally. So when I tap in to things I'm curious about, what I focus and pay attention to are connecting dots and understanding people, understanding how things are connected. Like that's a little bit like how my intuition then goes to that, right? And then how I translate are all four ways that you translate. Sometimes I know things, I get feelings about things, I hear things, and I see things. Like people's faces pop in my head or solutions pop in my head. But when it comes to translating the world, like how I experience the world, not intuitively, but otherwise, is very physical. It's very physical. So I have a very, like, just the way that I am, for example, is mentally, I know when I get onto a plane that it is actually a smaller space, but there's something about being in a plane that my physical body, there's this thing that happens where I feel really compressed. And so I've learned over time where to sit on the plane so that I physically feel comfortable. That is distinct for me than intuitively tapping in and understanding something. So that physical experience, I have physical experiences in spaces, but that's just how I process things. I'm a very physical processor. I'm like, here, give me the thing, let me do it. That's how I learn. Distinct from Intuition, I need no learning. I understand things without having met the person, knowing anything about them. Stuff pops in my head. That's my intuition. So where I see it a lot is with people who intuitively are oriented heart-wise, emotionally. And so the intuition they receive is related to the emotions they perceive in others.
Mm.
So like my husband is heart oriented. So when he meets new people, he does things like he asks people how they are. And if people are like, I'm fine, he asks again, but in a slightly different way, because what he's doing in that moment, his intuition, his desire is a depth of connection, because that's how heart-oriented people are. However, when you give my husband a problem to figure out, he processes life mentally, not emotionally, but intuitively, he is just very emotionally oriented. Now, some people's match, right? Some people are mentally oriented in their intuition and they process life mentally. But this is that distinction. That's what I mean. It's like if you've ever heard people say, like if you've ever taken the Enneagram, I'm on the Enneagram, I'm a 2, and we're the more, like, I can't remember what the triad is, but that is actually very different for me than how I process things intuitively. So when I'm in a meeting, like a business meeting, a client hires me and I'm sitting in their business meeting with all of their executive staff, and I'm listening, right, and I'm taking notes. And what I'm listening for is, where is the disconnection that's causing the breakdown in communication in this team, right, of executives? What can we adjust or change? Who are the people in this group that are not connecting? And I'm intuitively listening. However, if I was not there in the pathway of being an intuitive listening, right, being a consultant in that way, and in intuiting the meeting, I would show up in the meeting in a really different way. I just would show up differently. Like when I go to like a sporting event, or I go to like an amusement park or someplace with a lot of people, if I was intuitively trying to sort something out, it's like a million people's voices in my head, because I'm connecting dots and trying to understand. But if I'm just there and I'm not focused on my intuition, I feel physically overwhelmed because there's so many people. I'm like, where do I go so that there's not people all the way around me? Because I hate that. I'm like, oh, I don't like to feel that feeling of like not enough room for me. But that's a different thing. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Ultimately, we're receiving info from one avenue, and then what we do with that info is maybe different than the way we receive it.
Totally. Yeah. And it makes a difference because some people are really, they think they're in, like, I have one client right now who she took the test and she's like, it says I'm heart oriented. I am not heart oriented. I'm very process oriented. I'm very logical. I'm very structured. I said, no, your brain is really logical and structured, but your intuition is not. And so I gave her some examples we had talked about. When you intuitively tap into people, what you're tapping into is how they feel. So when you are tapping into her family, for example, 2 kids and her husband, like what happens in her body, because she's a feeler, that's how she translates as she feels. She'll get to this place where she just feels super upset, but she can't figure out why, because it's not her emotions.
Right.
It's not her feeling about something. She's feeling the feeling of other people. That's what happens when you're emotionally oriented in how your intuition works.
It's also
However,
why it's so freaking important that we get to be in a house alone. To totally decompress.
no
Seriously.
freaking joke. So true.
Seriously.
So true. It's so true.
It's like cherished time for me, because if I have family, even if they're not talking to me and they're in the house, I can still feel them. So I'm like, I just need every week to have time where none of you are in the house, so that my body can actually fully decompress all of you. And I can hear myself completely and fully without any interjections, where I'm also going like, that's not them, this is me, right? Like with practice, we can do this, but it's way easier when I'm on my own in my home by myself. And it's
100%. Yeah. My husband is built very, very similar to you. He is also empathic. He feels the feelings of other people as though they're his own. I'm not empathic in that way. I'm more empathic in thought. So I can be with people and not recognize I picked up their thinking. It happens with my mom a lot. And because I'm not emotionally oriented. I'm mentally oriented. I'm a mind intuitive. So I just like how my intuition comes in is more oriented in connecting dots and understanding people. So I say things to people out loud sometimes. They're like, oh my God, that's exactly what I was thinking. The same way that my husband, when he's with people, he'll say, gosh, that must have made you feel really frustrated and alone. And they'll be like, oh my God, that's exactly how I felt. Like they feel so recreated in their feelings, right? It's the same way that people feel recreated in their thinking with me. I'm just not emotionally oriented. So I think once people understand that, and when I've worked with leadership teams, when they understand the difference, then it helps them understand that they're actually speaking different languages.
So
And
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I know we could talk about it forever, but I want to also ask you quickly, because I know we're also coming up to the end of our time together. You had mentioned that you have some myths about intuition that you have been talking about. So I'd love for you to be able to share like maybe even 3 of the myths that you've had about people coming up that are, let's bust some. Let's bust some myths about intuition today.
Bust the myths.
Bust a myth.
So one of the myths is that spirituality is a requirement to tap into your intuition.
Oh yes,
It's
that's
not.
a big myth. Big
Yeah,
myth.
it's not. And so a lot of people think that they have to buy into a particular kind of spirituality, whether like they have to now start talking like light workers and woo-woo and crystals, and like actually none of those things are requirements. It's how your body is designed. You don't have to become a neurobiologist to understand that if put your hand on a stove, it will burn your fingers. Like you don't have to understand why that is. You just know that is. You got to know that's how your body is designed, is to be able to tap into circumstances, people, your own body, and have understanding, direct understanding and knowing of things that doesn't require data. That's how intuition works. Another myth that I hear people talking about that like makes me a little nutty, like makes me full on a little nutty, is when people are like, well, intuition's really hard. It takes years. It's not actually hard at all.
No.
What is more of a challenge is to build the habit of using intuition instead of whatever it is you normally use to make decisions. That part, building a new habit, can be hard. So to me, this is more of a conversation about habit versus hardness. It's not hard. Intuition is actually it's so easy. Once you learn what it is, you're like, oh, got it. That's that thing. Oh my gosh, it's been talking to me forever and I've been ignoring it. And you're like, oh, now I can hear it. I'm going to totally use it. That makes life so much easier, right?
I would say the other challenge with that, again, like I mentioned this before, is like trusting it, right?
Oh
it's
my
like,
gosh. So
especially when it asks you to do some bigger things that are a little bit hairy and scary, right? Like when it says to you, go on a plane to this destination, and you're like, I don't know, or go get in your car, and you're supposed to go to the Starbucks right now to go da da da, and you're like, but why? And then you don't listen. But then the next time you do, and the next time you get there and you're like, oh my God. And then you end up meeting the lover of your life, or you end up meeting, oh my God, your next client. And you're like, of course, thank you, intuition, for like guiding me here. But you have to learn that when it's speaking to you, you get to trust it. And again, take those actions on it. And I think that's the piece that like people, they don't want to trust it right away because it had to be harder or something, right?
Well, and I also think they don't want to trust it because intuition often comes without any evidence.
Right.
So
often,
even if you learn all the time, that they want evidence for it before they'll follow it, because the habit of being data driven in your decision making is hard to break. That's the thing, is you have to develop a new habit. So that's something I always talk about with people in programs and when I work with people one-on-one. You're building a new habit. Your old habit is follow other people's expertise outside of you and what you already know and have experienced. What I'm asking you to do is to push all of that aside for a minute and to listen very deeply within to what actually is in alignment with the kind of life you want. So, you just sent out all of your engagement announcements. You already went to the place and got the dress, but every time you think about getting married, everything inside of you clenches up. That's your intuition. You should investigate what your intuition is trying to tell you. Like, is it telling you to call the whole thing off? Is it telling you to go and elope? Is it telling you this person is not for you? That's why we engage. The last myth for me is that people say, and it's the thing I said in the beginning, which is that intuition is mysterious or magical versus it's practical. Intuition is really practical. And the more you use it, the more practical it becomes. And, I'm super woo. I mean, I believe in all those things, manifestation and crystals and, spirit guides and all that stuff. But it's not a requirement to have the same beliefs as me to access your intuition. You could be a stockbroker, and an atheist in New York City and follow your intuition.
Hell yeah.
You could be a Baptist preacher and have a whole congregation and you could listen to your intuition. Like, I've watched people of all varieties awaken to this. Oh, this is this like inner guidance system that I have that I've been like ignoring. It's like GPS turned on the lowest volume. Lowest volume. Now you just go, you just turn it up. It's one of my favorite things to do is to watch people that's why people think it's magical, because it seems so magical that it could be so easy.
It's true, because when you start following your intuition, I mean, like I wrote a post the day, honest to God, like the craziest things happen. Okay. So for example, I'm going to give you this really amazing example for intuition that just happened to me. I wasn't going to go. It was the last day of Miami crypto experience and I was exhausted. I was tired. And all of a sudden they invite us to this bare knuckle boxing fight, which is like, really? Okay.
Yeah, really?
And so, but I was like, all right, whatever. There's a whole bunch of cool people in there. I'll go in, I'll see. It's, I don't have to pay for this ticket. Someone's giving it to me. Why not? If I don't like it, I can always leave. Right. I end up like, we've already been in this workshop for, 2.5 days by now. And I end up sitting next to this guy. We start chatting. Long story short, he is one of the first DeFi lending platforms in crypto, like he created, right?
Of course he was.
And I'm like, of course you are. And then we start chatting more. And of course he lives in the suburb next to me in Denver. And of course we have like the same favorite restaurant. And of course we're going to go out and have a cup of together. Like, of course. But if I had not just gone and gone, all right, okay, whatever. I don't know why I'm going into this weird bare knuckle boxing fight that sounds like seriously brutality. And loud and lots of noise and more people in my field. Okay. But then I wouldn't have met this amazing man. And then after that, I was like, oh, have you guys seen this other guy? Do you know where he is? I go over to this other section of the stadium. And the next thing I know, there's this guy who's a musician who'd been playing the night before on stage in our event, like doing this whole big show for everybody. I didn't happen to be there, but I knew he was playing. And the next day, like I'm sitting next to him and he starts saying something about singing. And I was like, oh, Ed, you can sing to me. And I was like, I'm pretty sure this is who the guy is. I didn't see his face, but I was pretty sure it's who the guy was. And all of a sudden, the next thing I know, I'm being serenaded. It's like, go ahead. And I'm like, but that's intuition, right? Like, that's like, where do you get to have these experiences? I mean, it goes on and on and on and on to the ways that we can have these most magical, wondrous, literally I was sitting in the stadium when we were there and I get called up onto the stage to be part of this panel that I was not supposed to be part of, and end up on this big, huge stage. And I'm like, if I hadn't been in the room sitting there for the 30 seconds prior, when all of a sudden two of the panelists didn't show up, they're like, oh, we need a panelist. Carrie, you're the next panelist. Let's go. Okay, here I am. Let's go. And it ended up being the most perfectly aligned conversation about the new earth and new wealth, like where we're going in the finances. All of these things happen simply because I was like intuitively like, let's go into this room right now. Let's go do this thing right now. And it happens all day long, every day, if we let it. And I think this is the thing that is so important. It's not about necessarily all these really big decisions, because when the really big decisions happen, you will trust it because you trusted all those other little ones that you go, are you serious? Of course. Of course. 100%. Of course this happened. Like, it didn't matter whether I went to that boxing. And to be honest, if my life never met any of these people, like my life would not be like ending. Terrible. Right. It wouldn't be terrible. But like, of course, this is what gets to happen, because of course I just trust my intuition in every moment of the day. And I think that's where like, it's so important for everybody. Like, as I want to leave, and I think you would probably as well, like I personally want to leave this with is like, it's an everyday, all day thing. It isn't a magical thing. It's like, this is how you get to literally be guided by in your life. And when you allow yourself on all, I'm not going to say all your decisions, because sometimes we are in like, I'm just going to wake up and eat the breakfast that I eat, right? Like, yeah. I'm going to have my shower because I have a shower right now. But like, generally speaking, if I allow my life to be guided by intuition from all of the aspects of my life, then it's just how I live it. It doesn't become magic. This is just who you are, who you be. And of course, then everything gets to be magical because you are so, like, to me, intuition is the divine connection with your soul. Like, you are deeply connected with yourself, listening to, like, this is the right place for me at the right time. And I then believe that by listening to my intuition, magic and miracles get to happen because I'm in
And I
divine
just want to
guidance.
say, people who listen to your podcast probably hold that same belief, but just in case you're someone who's more skeptical and that like that language she just used doesn't land for you, you don't have to believe that your intuition is a connection to your soul to connect to it.
True.
And it can still literally transform your life, because if you listen to that inner guidance, it is scanning all the things around you at all times in alignment with what you actually want. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I don't even know what I'd use my intuition for, because you've never made an intuitive decision before that you're aware of, the first place to start, just like Carrie said, is get in touch with what I would call soul, what Carrie and I would call soul, but just get in touch with that inner part of you that is most alive. Like, when you're most alive, what are you doing? And like, ask yourself some questions like, how could you have more of those kind of experiences in life? And then use your intuition to guide you to that. Like, how do I have the kind of job where I have that kind of experience? How do I have the kind of friendships and community where I have that kind of alive experience? How do I have pillows on my couch that when I look at them bring me joy? How do I have a color on the wall of my office? Like, you can use it just like you use data, but instead you can not get rid of data, but instead you can build this habit to become an intuitive decision maker. And I'm with Carrie in that I would use the same languaging, which is that I really do feel it's the depth of connection with the inner truth of who we are. However, you don't have to believe that in order for it to work. All it is just this skill you have, like putting your hand on a hot stove and you're like, ow, that's how the body and brain is designed. You don't even have to understand how it's designed in order to use it. Intuition is the same way. Once you can recognize those signals, just like the ow signals in your fingertips, once you understand how it actually works, you can use it and then apply it everywhere, just like she's saying. And magical stuff is, I like saying weird, because weird is inexplicable. Like, that's what weird translated means. Like, that's what the actual definition is. So weird stuff happens when you start listening to your intuition. Yeah, serendipitous, inexplicable. Like, you go to I went to a party that I wasn't supposed to go to because I had something else planned, but we made it work. And I got there, met two amazing people, one of which invited me to come to his birthday party across the country in DC. Didn't know him, but my intuition said to go, went to his party. And the people that I met at that party now are some of the most important clients I have, 4 years later. So we don't know, one very, very small decision, what the outcome of that will be. Just like anyone listening to this has ever made this decision they didn't think was a big one, and it ended up being a huge decision that was like a pivot moment in their life. I think all of us would prefer that those pivot moments pivot us towards what we really want versus pivoting us towards some mess to clean up. So that's what intuition can help you do. Pivot you towards what you really want.
I love it. And I love that you brought in the importance of the intention with your intuition. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, my dear. This has been absolutely amazing. I love the way that you practically teach intuition. So, so amazing. Can you let everybody know if there's anything else you would like to wrap this up with? And then how do they find you?
Great. So if you are listening to this and you're like, I don't totally understand how my intuition works, don't worry. There is actually a way to learn. You can take my test, the Intuitive Blueprint test. So I recommend that everyone listening takes that. Takes 5 minutes. And then once you understand the mechanics of your intuition, you can get started. How you can find me is howtobeintuitive.com. It's information about how you can become intuitive, how you can actually live your life intuitively, operate your business intuitively. But you can also find me on social media. I'm Shoshana French. There's no others of me on social media. It's an unusual name. That's a plus. So come find me on Instagram, impressive. Come find me on Facebook, friend me, let's chat. Let me know what support you need to be able to begin to trust your intuition now.
Beautiful. And we both love hearing from our listener, from my listeners, from clients, from people who are following us around the world. If this has made an impact on you, if there's been something that has been like, wow, please do share this. conversation, please do reach out to us. Let us know what's come up for you, what shifted in you. We do love hearing from the listeners. We love hearing how this has impacted you. So please reach out to us. And otherwise, have a wonderful week, everybody. Thank you so much, Shoshana, for being here. This has been absolutely amazing. And I will see you next week on the Wealth Alchemist podcast.
Just a quick message for you about a new mastermind called Unplug that I am inviting you into. There is an amazing buzz around the crypto space, and with that comes a whole new language and an education to be able to take advantage of early adoption as we move into this amazing space. So many people think that you have missed this early stage, but we are still there and you still most definitely have time to get in and dive deep. This is why I created Unplug. I know many of you want to learn to take the cash you are making and get it working for you so that you can create another form of income and eventually financial freedom. I also know that there are many of you out there that realize the financial system is corrupt and not designed for us, and you want a way out. The crypto space is amazing and also a learning curve. If you don't know what you're doing, you can run into all kinds of mishaps that will lose you money. So if you want to accelerate your wealth creation and learn how to decentralize yourself and your biz so that you can become sovereign, Unplug is for you. I will show you how to get returns that range anywhere from 5% up to, I had 61% compounding interest in one of my accounts just a few weeks ago. This is not always available, but it definitely exists. We will be learning about NFTs, DeFi, privacy, and learning how to make smart investment decisions and getting your biz crypto and web 3.0 ready and more. There are so many amazing people already signed up and getting moving, and the caliber of people coming into this space is amazing. Not just the participants, but also the guests I have lined up. It's not just about me. This is a mastermind where everyone will learn and grow in this new space together. If you are ready to leap into the new wealth and break free of the banking system, this is for you. Please message me on Facebook or Insta for more details. Our first call begins on the 26th of January. If you are hearing this message after that, please do still reach out and let's see how I can support you to get into the crypto space. And now back to the show.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you love what you heard, please help us get this message out to more people, because together we rise. Please review it, subscribe to the show, and share on social media. When you share, please tag me. On Insta, I'm at Carrie Norley, and on Facebook, I'm facebook.com/Carrie Norley1, or Carrie Kaplan Norley is my official name there. Please come and connect with me on social media and say hello. I love hearing from my listeners. And thank you so much for your support. I'm so excited to help you bring in the new wealth.